The coronavirus pandemic has put life as we know it on hold. It has disrupted systems around the world and has set the stage for a new reality. This pandemic has revealed the flaws in our systems, leading to discussions of new economies, social justice, and ecological accountability that would have been dismissed as left-wing fantasies a few months ago. And there is no reason for change to stop here. For every poison, there is an antidote. At Fearless, we are excited to launch our first online campaign responding to this moment of global fear and trauma. We are conducting a series of workshops to collaboratively use our imaginations and envision the future world that we'd like to live and love in. We are looking for long-term emotional, personal, spiritual, systemic cures. We are doing this by bringing together activists, artists, practitioners, thinkers and writers who are innovating in their fields. Fearless founder Shilo and a co-host will guide panelists through collectively reimagining our future worlds. The first workshop was on body, touch and pleasure. When we re-emerge from this crisis, how do we want to connect with ourselves, our bodies and our communities in our fearless future? The workshop explored questions like, how will we touch each other in these times? How are bodies perceived, represented and valued? What brings us pleasure? And what do we desire?
Wonderful. So I'm just going to jump straight in. I think there are still a few people who are going to be joining us, but we'll let them come as they come. So just to begin, I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we're all here today and what to expect, and then we'll jump right into it. But just so you know, this is going to be a very fun, ridiculous imaginarium. We don't care so much about any of your preconceived notions or information or knowledge that we come with as much as we care about your imaginations. So just to give you a very quick introduction to Fearless, we began in 2012 at a moment of pretty tremendous fear, actually, following the gang rape of a 21-year-old girl in New Delhi. And I went out to the protests, and of course we were there really discussing the issue. Right? And we all are quite well versed with the issue. Spaces in South Asia, but also spaces across the Middle East and Africa are tremendously unsafe for women, for queer communities, for any of us on the margins. And while we are very, very well versed with the issue and we know the kind of fear that there is in the streets, sometimes there is a problem when we are constantly reinforcing the issue and talking about our oppression and not simultaneously understanding or articulate what lies on the other side of that. So particularly when it comes to sex and pleasure, we talk so much about consent, we talk so much about rape, but we don't talk as much about female pleasure in space or pleasure at all in spaces like India, the Middle East and Africa. And so at some point it felt like all of the fear and also the articulation of the issue was becoming really counterproductive to the change that we actually needed to see. And so Fearless began as this flood, as a kind of counter force, where while bodies of women and queer people are often represented for them, we began to represent ourselves in public spaces. None of the people that we paint with usually have painted before in their lives, but through the techniques that we have, it becomes easy for them to be able to make a self-portrait of themselves. So for example, when we painted this huge image of a transgender sex worker in Pakistan in the streets of Rawalpindi, it doesn't say stop violence against the trans community. It says, Hum hai takhliq-e khuda, I am a creation of Allah, which for the trans community is the most radical and most embodied thing that they can say. Something that started to happen quite a lot was that when people looked at art and activism, they looked at it in a way which was like, Acha, you make a poster for us, or paint a mural for us, and that's it. But I believe that artists do far more than just make posters or murals. Artists know how to create and they know how to imagine. And especially in moments like this, when the world as we know it has stopped completely, we do have this vital tool inside all of us, I suppose, which is our imagination, which is a tool that we can actually not just ask questions with, but also find solutions and find the answers and articulate the answers. So, I know there's been a lot of people speaking about how this is a time to reinvent ourselves and to create a new world. And while we totally agree this is a time to question everything and create a new world, we also believe that we do have the tools to be actually able to do that. So when we re-emerge, can we re-emerge with new border systems? Can we re-emerge with a different way of treating our bodies and sexuality and pleasure? Because this is the first time in our lifetimes that everything that we know has stopped completely. So we developed this workshop called Fearless Futures, which basically took the idea of artists and activists coming together beyond just making images and actually into a space where we could create a new world together, like create a new reality together. The tool that we use for Fearless Futures is, first of all, our imaginations, because we believe that fear is a complete misuse of the imagination. And very often, when we're children, we are allowed to dream. We can think about all of the magnificent kingdoms that we want to inhabit and the monsters underneath our bed. But as we grow older and older, we start to only imagine the monsters. So, it's like, as I step out at night, my mother will say to me, make sure you're wearing a jacket and give me your cab driver's number, because she's imagining the worst that could happen to me. And now with Corona, it's not that different. It's just make sure you wear your face mask, make sure your hands are covered. But imagine if we could actually start to think about it differently and say that perhaps if I walk out, it's not just the worst that's going to happen. Perhaps I can also start to reclaim my own reality by imagining what else is possible with the world. So our primary kind of tool is our imagination. The second tool that we use is maps, because for every world, there is a map that we make. And so all of you here today are going to be our Atlas workers. And before you were artists or activists or feminists or socialists or revolutionaries or he, she's or theys or queer or bi or polyamorous or heterosexual or agnostic or atheists or believings or firefighters or activators or organizers, you were once a child. So let this be our common ground. Let this be the space that we start at. And let's really tap into the child that lives inside of us still. We're focusing on love and pleasure and sex and touch, because goddamn, a lot of us are not being touched right now. and there's also so much fear, I suppose, around how, when we can touch each other, how will we touch each other? How are we going to come back into this world of sensuality, of touch, of pleasure, without fear? Because sometimes I think the sensuality and sexuality requires a little bit of transgression and a little bit of fearlessness. So to introduce this particular village of love, I'd like to bring on my co-host Kaz to maybe share a little bit about her work. And just tell us a little bit about what she does. Ironically, I met Kaz in a beautiful, sprawling, incredibly pleasurable palace in Rajasthan, where there was actually a sex room. There was a painted room that this old Maharaja used to have, full of images of sexy bodies. And it was quite beautiful to behold as well, because why should sex be in a bedroom? Why can't we have two separate spaces for where we make love and where we sleep? So yeah, Kaz, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Shilo. That was really beautiful. And first of all, I just want to say that I'm really honored to be here. I really do wish that this was something that was happening in person. I know that Shilo, you were set to come to Kenya for the Spread Festival, which would have been happening in a couple of weeks, but that's not happening just yet. So I'm really glad that I get to be a part of this, because I also think that this is going to be a great opportunity for me to learn from so many different people around the world. And I feel like, this is our new way of also reinventing intimacy with people that we don't know from different parts, and sort of to learn how it is that people are navigating different spaces, how people are learning intimacy, pleasure, eroticism in these times. So I'm really just very grateful to be here. And of course, I love everything that Fearless does. So thanks. A little bit more about me. I introduced myself earlier. I suppose everybody caught that, but if you didn't, my name is Kaz, and I am a sex educator and content creator living and working from Nairobi, Kenya. And I've been doing this work for not very long, actually, for about 4 years now. Before that, I was in the entertainment industry. I still am, in certain certain ways. I'm as an actor and a musician. And I suppose that the reason that I started, actually, I'm going to start the genesis of sex education started with creating a podcast that was creating safe spaces for people to be able to come to and feel like there was no shame and there was no guilt associated with any kind of their different forms of pleasure that they were feeling, that they were experiencing, that they had grown up knowing was completely taboo. And that's the African context of a lot of sexuality. So in schools, a lot of the sex education that is taught is not comprehensive and is taught like in a very negative way. A lot of the sex education is very much based on, disease based. It's pregnancy, unwanted pregnancies. That's the way in which a lot of young people are growing up and navigating the world with that in the background. It's just like sex education classes is a picture of somebody's genitals that is diseased, and everybody has fear around sex and sexuality, and this is just the way people are, are walking around. Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous. So I grew up in a household that was a lot more liberal than many other African households. And my parents were, my parents were the life of the party. They were the fun people. They always threw parties, and we always talked. We were very open with our conversations, and conversations with my mom about sex were just like almost like having breakfast. And I figured that, I realized that there were so many people around me that were not able to have these conversations and felt so much guilt and shame around them. So I started this is how it began. I started having conversations with people. I started, not feeling any fear around researching different topics around sexuality. And then I started with a podcast, and this was a way for me to be able to broaden these conversations so that people were then felt more included into these conversations. And it was just about releasing any of the taboo around conversations, releasing any of the shame around things as simple as masturbation, for example. And so 4 years ago, the Spread podcast began. And from that, we've built and we've grown, and, creating content that is more visual. We now have a little TV segment as well, which is great because it doesn't happen in Kenya. They wouldn't allow us to have it in Kenya. So the podcast was syndicated by a European television station. So that's where we broadcast off of. And this is great because it's still content that's available online, and it's still it's really just creating safe spaces for everybody to feel pleasure, to feel safe, to have no fear, to have conversations with an imaginary person that lives in Kenya, but also to be able to, the minute that you start to have conversations, it becomes a domino effect, and you start to have conversations with other people, with your partners, with self. You start to journal, and you start to create these new realities about yourself and all of the things that you could achieve or that you could experience from an erotic space, from a pleasure space, from a non-sexual space. Because again, as much as there is a lot of taboo around sexuality and pleasure, and there's so much information that the media is pushing towards us about what sex looks like, what sex should look like, but then there's still a whole group of people that are not sexual, and then there's a lot of taboo and shame around those people, and there's no space for them to understand. Like, there's no space for people to learn about asexuality, and that it's okay, and that not everybody has to be a sexual being. And so it's just a platform for you to come as you are, and then let's just take it from there. I was just listening to a talk by Esther Perel quite recently, and she was just saying you just have to have the willingness to show up at the table even if you're not hungry, so that if the people around you want to eat, then they can eat, and it's cool. But then, you never know what will happen when you show up at the table. You might get hungry, something might look appetizing to you, and you might want to take a bite. And then from that bite, you might enjoy it, you might want some dessert. And so I think more than anything, I think the fact that everybody's here today just shows that we've all taken that step. And I think it's a big step. to show your willingness to be a part of this workshop. And once again, Shilo and the Fearless crew, thank you.
The intention of this workshop is that we're going to end up bringing together this crazy group of artists and activists, all who are involved in sex and pleasure in some way. And we're actually going to create new realities, which means that we could write the script for a future feminist porno, or we could write a spoken word piece or a piece of poetry that teaches sex education in this sensual and sacred way to children, or we could create a book of anatomical flower vaginas. Like, what we want to create out of this workshop is completely in our own hands, but the intention is to not just talk about the issue or not even just talk about the thing itself, but to actually manifest something. And again, going back to how so many people, including Arundhati Roy or including Bjork, are talking about how we need to use this moment of incubation to create a new world. So we will create a new world together at the end of this workshop, or at least a glimmer of a new world. So in order to be able to go into this safe and sacred future and to be like little children who have completely abandoned all the guilt, all the shame, all the fear that we have about sex and pleasure in particular, and boy, there is a lot of guilt and fear and shame around sex and pleasure, we do an exercise called suspension of disbelief. Is anyone familiar with the term suspension of disbelief? Just put your hand up if you are. All right, cool. So basically, suspension of disbelief is that moment in movies or in fantasy, or even when we play together as little children, where if two kids are playing next to each other, for example, and one kid says, "Hey, that's a purple dinosaur," instead of saying, "No, it's not," like you're making the shit up, the second kid is like, "Yeah, and his name is Fred." And the second that transgression, the second you step beyond the known reality into the imaginary, into the unexpected, into the unbelievable, you can then enter into a new world together. Now, it's very hard, especially for artists and activists, to be able to take that leap together, because we have so many preconceived notions, right? And we have so much trauma as well. Like, there are so many things about our current realities, especially when it comes to sex and pleasure, that are hard to let go of in order to be able to step into and create a new world. But we gotta let go of them. We have to become like little children in order to be able to truly imagine from a space of love and not from a space of fear or even focusing on the critique of the issue. So suspension of disbelief is an exercise that we do where each of us here are basically going to let go of a current reality, like literally just chuck it out of the window, so that we don't have to talk about it, so that we don't have to be critical, we don't have to say the right thing, but instead we can be hopeful and imaginative as we move forward. So I can start. One reality that I would really, really, really like to let go of is perhaps the feeling that my body will always be objectified and will always be somehow impure and not a sacred space. Like I look at my body as a temple. Like I feel like I can worship my own body in so many ways, and it's a pathway to God, and pleasure is a pathway to God. But when I look at the rest of the world around me, they don't seem to believe that. And I want to let go of the belief that female bodies will always just be objects.
The suspension of disbelief. Am I doing this right? I'd like to suspend. Okay. Yeah. I'd like to suspend the belief that interacting and expressing through my body will limit my experience, or like trap it in like just the physical, that it could be a vehicle for so many other things.
One of the things, a belief that's in my very relevant in my field, is that you need a lot of qualification to be legitimized, to talk about pleasure. You know, you need like multiple master's degrees, you need multiple PhDs. You know, thinking about Esther Perel herself, the woman has gone through so much just to like be legitimized as a psychotherapist in New York, as a Belgian immigrant. So I would like to suspend the belief that we require to be a certain kind of human being, you know, which is white, upper middle class, and cisgender, to sort of talk about pleasure and sexuality and be taken seriously in this world?
Yeah, I can go next. Thank you for everyone who shared till now. I would like to share maybe something. I don't know if it's a reality that that happens to be forced on many different in many different societies, or it's a mentality that pleasure equals sexual penetration. Like this is a reality that existed in somehow to oppress I don't know, many group of people, and I'm especially talking about LGBT. Like the society like always is saying that you cannot have pleasure if there is no penetration. But meanwhile, I believe that personally, like the fact to express yourself, your body, and sexuality is really a big, amazing, let's say, a pleasure, a source of pleasure, and it's not always linked to penetration. And there are so many topics that come under this topic, but mainly I would like to focus on this, like give your body the opportunity to experience different things other than penetration, and you can learn a lot of things about yourself while experiencing sex, and it's not always linked to penetration to have pleasure. And I think that this is a topic that was always like in my mind, because I worked 2 years as a center coordinator for an LGBTIQ beneficiaries, and we have this conversation in the community, like the people, like especially like this is something that really bothered me. Like, yeah, two lesbians cannot have beautiful sex because there is no penetration, but this is something that I really like. Every time I hear it, I just stop. Sex doesn't mean penetration, and sex is more than that, is more deep than that, is beyond than having a penetration. It's like, for me, it might be a spiritual connection between two people who are gathered in the same space, in the same room, let's say. So pleasure is not always penetration, and and this was the belief that I was hearing it in different part of societies, coming from different part of communities. Somehow it's like, okay for you if some people think that sex means penetration, that's okay for you, but don't impose it on other people, and especially don't use it as a way to be misogynist or to be homophobic or to throw hate. Because personally, I believe that we can experience many things, and you can open and you can travel with doing many things, even if there is no penetration.
Stunning. Oh my God. It was like there was some poetry in there, wasn't there? That sex is deeper than penetration.
Deeper than penetration. How beautiful.
Beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous.
Pleasure being deeper than penetration. One thing that really stuck, which I've written here, is that I think we limit pleasure to sex and sexuality, and we always limit it to the body. Or maybe I've sort of fallen into that trap of limiting pleasure to the body, and that's something that I'm trying to let go of, or I want to let go of.
So I think I want to let go of the idea that you have to be sexual with someone for you to be intimate with that person. This idea that we must always have sex for our connection to be deeper, to be more valid, to be stronger. And it discounts other kinds of relationships you can have, intimate relationships you can have with friends, partners, parents, children, or whatever the case may be. So for me, it's really important that people are able to make the distinction between a sexual intimacy and other forms of intimacy. Yeah.
Yep. I think I can see lots of heads shaking in agreement. Everyone's just like, yeah. Which is also what I love about these workshops, is that, the story of one person can often be mirrored in the story of so many. Like, we all agree with each other, right? Despite different contexts, despite different sexual leanings, despite everything, all the differences that we have, we can share an emotional experience.
I think one of the things that that I have thought a lot about and constantly struggle with is the idea that only certain bodies deserve to feel pleasure or seek pleasure. And I think I would really like to let go of that idea and just almost like being brainwashed and being told that for years that only a certain kind of body is allowed to exist almost. And yeah, so I think all bodies deserve pleasure, all bodies can seek pleasure, and all bodies should have the opportunity and chance to look for it in whatever way that they want to. And yeah, I think that is something that I would really like to let go of.
So actually going back to sex for a moment, I'd like to vanquish some of my beliefs that I kind of know I shouldn't have, but still haven't managed to vanquish. It's funny how even once you realize that there's a flaw in the way you're seeing something, you don't unsee it immediately. And so for the longest time, I faked orgasm because I just thought all sexual experiences have to end in orgasm, even when you know it isn't going to happen today, you know? And so I never want to fake an orgasm again. But I also want to vanquish the belief that sex has to end in orgasm. I feel like part of the reason we, so often miscommunicate or sort of perform in the bedroom instead of just being is because we have all these ideas about what sex ought to look like instead of just letting it look like what it looks like. So those are some of the things I want to stop doing. Like, sex isn't this talent show where the other person's pleasure is the focus and you have to, show how good you are at it and all of that. But I also think the other side of that reason that so many women fake orgasm, and I've definitely done it too, is because I think there's a subliminal sort of, I don't know whether it's because of conditioning or because of, so many inequalities to do with gender in our society or whatever it is. But even, given that I'm an activist and all of that, I've definitely thought that my pleasure is too tedious or too time consuming, or maybe, there's shame around how things look or feel or smell or body hair and all of that. And so I'm so quick to allow for my pleasure to be secondary to that of the man. I mean, I'm heterosexual, so my male partner. And I think while I want to, at one level, stop thinking that sex has to end in orgasm, I also want to stop thinking that my pleasure is too much to ask for.
I want to let go of all of this stuff, guys. Like everything that everyone has said. I feel like as you're all speaking, I'm like, oh, just let it go, Shilo. And I'm sure everybody feels the same way as well. I want to let go of the belief that my sex is too tedious. Is such a beautiful thing. I want to let go of performative sex, or sex isn't a talent show. Like it feels like we're writing a poem as people are speaking. So thank you for that.
So I've written that I want to let go of the belief that I'm not safe. I think because of my PTSD, I often feel like hypervigilant or very scared wherever I am, like even if it's in my bedroom, or if I'm in a bus, if it's a crowded space, or if it's like in a lover's arm. Like I always like have the feeling at the back of my mind that something might happen, like the situation might change at any moment. So even places like create safe spaces, like I have a doubt that maybe they aren't a safe space. So I want to allow myself to be vulnerable and just let go of my guard.
Beautiful, absolutely. I definitely, I feel like we all agree with that as well. We all want to let go of the idea that we're not safe in the bedroom, in a bus stand, in a bus, on the streets, in our own homes. So thank you for that.
I will say what I want to let go of, but a little context is that I've been struggling, in a relationship with a man who, it's been like a constant, baggage of emotions going back and forth. And I realized that I understand all of these things, and the next moment I go to him seeking validation. And I don't understand what is this thing about me that I understand that this man is, and I realize that he's both the poison and the antidote, and I'm just not able to understand. And so I've written that I want to let go of the belief that I'm incomplete without a man, as a gay man, of course. So I think, but it's a very difficult thing to even let go of. So I was just like, at one level, I was like what you said, all of you resonated with me. But at another level, I was like, is this even real? Are we going to? And then I realized it's suspension of disbelief. So as Shilo explained, so this moment, I would like to be here and understand that I am complete and I'm worthy of who I am, and nobody else needs to validate that for me. Yeah.
I want to let go of that belief that one of our first sex ed encounters is via porn and these unrealistic. I don't know how to articulate it, but basically, better education system, better discussions, maybe like at a younger level in school, that prepares us better when we are at a sexually active age. And because lately I've been, I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but this conversation around some Instagram channel, a group called The Locker Room. And after hearing those conversations, the boys and few girls who were involved in it, it was quite disturbing, and but it also did resonate with me somewhere when I was that young. I mean, I also had these notions about sex, and so I'd like to let go of the belief that, or maybe that we can do better with the new generation in terms of teaching them or educating them. I don't know.
Hi again. So recently, just a week back, thank you for bringing out the locker room thing, because like a week back I was facing a lot of like complaints as well as texts from people who have been victimized by online violence for a week now. And it has been, this whole locker room thing has been going on in Nepal as well, where there is subreddits and different platforms where women's photos are shared on non-consensually. So it was really difficult for me to get out of that space of so much trauma and fear to come here and talk about pleasure and the positive aspects of sex and basically pleasure. It was really difficult, but I needed to do that. And the one thing that I really want to let go of is the belief that or the fear of being punished for being a sexual being. I really want to let go of that fear of being punished. So yeah, that is what I want to let go of. Thank you.
Sure. So I think I've added a few of the things of what I want to let go of, along with what everyone's already said. So all of those things that I want to let go of. But one of the things that for myself I want to let go of is the judgment that I have about myself, and that at the age that I'm in, at the experience that I've had, I still feel that there's so much more to learn. And the way that I thought I was being sex positive or experiencing pleasure in a very positive and healthy way, to reflect back and see that it wasn't that healthy. And to, have the knowledge that I have, and I've had, I've had good sex education. I've had open conversations from a pretty young age about sex and what is pleasure and all of those things. Yet I find myself here, at 31, still figuring out that what is positive, what is a positive experience, what is a positive relationship with pleasure and sex and intimacy and all of these things that we're talking about. But I have judgment around the fact that by this time I should have figured that out. So I want to let go of that judgment. Yeah.
I want to let go of the fact that because I post pictures of my body or because I'm so sensual, that it means that I'm welcoming any kind of like anything that is unwanted. Yeah, I want to let go of the fact that because I'm in sex education, that it means that I want to fuck all the time.
I can see a lot of people saying amen. Yes. I was trying to say that everybody's like yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I once did the vagina. Actually, I've done the vagina monologue so many times, and one of my favorite vagina monologues is my short skirt. And basically, my short skirt is not an invitation.
All right. So maybe I mean, usually we were doing this workshop in person, we would actually be moving together a lot, and we'd be moving across this huge map. We carried this like 120-foot silk map that's actually in your house right now, Monica, sorry. And we would all move around this map and really move. But since we can't move, maybe for a second we all just get up, because I know we're all sitting a lot right now, and we just like actually just shake our bodies a little bit, make a lot of sound as I'm shaking, or do something, shake some part of your body, just get up, shake a little bit, move around, so that we actually let this shit go. Like in our fearless future, none of this shit coming in. Our bodies will not be a site of shame. Our bodies will not be taken advantage of. Our bodies will not be performatively used in our spaces. I can see some serious shaking. I love it. So we're all just letting all of that stuff out. We don't have to moan in stupid American accents. We don't have to be pornographic. We will feel safe. So this is our future. We're in a safe, sacred, decolonized, bodily, sensual place of pleasure. So thank you all. So we have crossed the threshold where we've suspended our disbeliefs and we've let go of all of those things that were holding us back. And now we can just imagine anew. So we're in our fearless future. And so the first question that I have, and I know we're kind of running a little bit late on time, is what turns you on? Very often our systems are defined on the fear rather than the love, right? So again, we speak about consent, but we don't speak about pleasure. But in this space, we will only speak about pleasure. So let's start to generate that juicy energy of what pleasure and sensuality and our bodies are. So I can start, and let's do it a little bit quickly, just so we can then break into our groups. But I guess for me, poetry and words and language is definitely a pathway to pleasure. I am extremely turned on by a man or a woman who can truly feel and express that feeling in the most beautiful way possible, simply because we have the ability to be beautiful and to say things in beautiful, tender ways. So that's what turns me on.
I personally really enjoy food, and I really enjoy food in all its pleasure. So the smell, the taste, the connection to someone else's pleasure through your actions and vice versa. And it can be a thing you do together, but even the way you eat food is very essential for me. So it really is, I can't imagine a day where I don't cook for my own self-pleasure. And part of that is nourishment, but also part of it is sexual nourishment as well, yeah. So definitely food for me is a big thing, yeah. I'm not doing cereal and noodles all the time, nah. I gotta eat really fancy all the time.
I can go next. For me, pleasure is not separate from pain, and it's not separate from grief, and it's not separate from shame, and it's not separate from fear. It's like there's a lot connected to it. I don't see it so separately. So for me, what's really turning on, like what is very turning on, is consistency, because when I allow myself to experience pleasure, a lot of other things come up along with that, and I really enjoy when there's a consistency to that. Like when either that meaning somebody else is consistent with whatever is coming up for me, and I'm there for them when whatever is coming up for them along with pleasure, so that it's it's more pleasurable to go deep into that. Or if I'm experiencing pleasure myself, I'm not doing it in like in a formulaic way just to do it. I'm actually consistent with myself as in a disciplined way to do it periodically.
So what turns me on, I think, is feeling really like that someone's getting me. That whether if I'm emoting something, that type of connection is, I think Monica just wrote being met. Yes, like feeling that you have just connected with someone. That's just the biggest turn on.
Yeah, I was thinking about what turns me on too, because for sure there are like branches, like if someone's really poetic, if someone's like really smart, if someone's got great style, there are all these things. And now that I've experienced these aspects in people and kind of gotten that out of my system, I've been like thinking about what is it that really turns me on, because I'm not really particularly interested in sex anymore. It's kind of weird. But when I feel met, when I feel heard, understood, and there's like an active live wire of curiosity, which either it's there or it's not. But when I feel that, like, it's like you're almost like feeding a fire, and the fire starts growing and growing and growing. And that turns me on. And that changes according to who I've become. But yeah, definitely that's what turns me on.
I can go next. I've sort of written a short list of things that turn me on. And on the top of that list is communication. And I feel that it's so because pleasure doesn't always come from another being. And it's the ability to communicate with self as well, and to understand the reason why certain things turn me on, and should we explore it, I say to self. And so just like open communication about pleasure is such a turn on for me. Oh my gosh, open communication about pleasure is the biggest turn on for me. The novelty of things is a turn on for me. I really enjoy newness. I love the exploration factor. I like novelty. The novelty of things is very it's exciting. Authenticity is a turn on for me. It's being authentic with myself as well as being with partner or partners that are authentic about who they are. And so, for example, Shilo, the way you said moaning in American, like if you were to moan in Sanskrit, and that is the thing that is authentic to you, then that shit would turn me on, So and just like the thing, meeting people where they are, and that where they are part of the phrase is the authenticity of somebody, or the authenticity of self. And I think that's a huge turn on. And also just understanding, so that when you connect with other people, understanding that their communication or their authenticity or all of these things, their novelty isn't always going to be the same as you. And if you can just, I guess, meet people where they are, or if you can find a way to communicate and to understand these different sort of different aspects. I think that for me, those four things are the things that stand out with what turns me on.
Eye contact turns me on. I feel like I could just look into someone's eyes for hours without being bored by not even having to do much more. And I think also that acts of tenderness turn me on. Like the other day, I was working out at home and I hurt my knee. And then later I was watching a Netflix show with my boyfriend, and he just, without really, us talking about it, he just got some like pain relief balm and a crepe bandage and started like bandaging my knee for me, just so that it would heal faster or whatever. And I suddenly, just the tenderness of that care that I didn't even ask for was such a turn on.
Hey, okay, I'm gonna go next because it kind of is linked to what Lisa said, that anticipating the needs of another person, that act of kindness, or the anticipation that someone might need something and you show up for them, that's a huge turn on. And water really turns me on. just being in water, listening to water, tasting it, feeling it on me. That is, yeah. I've actually moved to Goa to become a mermaid. So, yeah.
I think I also get turned on by open communication about pleasure. I think I love talking about pleasure. So that's certainly something that really gets me on,
Something that turns me on is unapologetically like complimenting someone. Like that shit is so amazing. Like just giving someone true, genuine compliments is so beautiful, so amazing. The second thing that really turns me on is articulating, like going deep into thoughts, going deep into ideas, conversations. That is amazing. So yeah, these two things.
I want to reflect to two things that they were mentioned. Monica said that being met, and I couldn't agree more. The fact that I've been met as a whole person, that I'm not always a source of pleasure, I'm source of sadness and difficulties and challenges, and having the person that can understand that I'm not made for pleasure, but I have in myself many things that doesn't bring pleasure. It's something that turns me on, the fact that, wow, okay, I might be sad and crying and I have someone who's understanding me. This is automatically turn on, let's go to bed. So yeah, the fact that I'm not always a source of pleasure, I have many things, I have many feelings, and I want someone to understand and to assimilate those things. And something else I would like to add, smell, like candles that have beautiful smells, scents, and the nature, I don't know, something like this is something really, for me, it's like, wow, amazing experience.
I guess the thing which is often, or at least whatever we discussed till now, is definitely there are a lot of elements to it, but vulnerability, to be vulnerable to some other person, right? I guess that is something which is very difficult for anybody to do, but I guess if you're able to do that to a large extent is what turns me on.
Wonderful. All right, Village. I'm very turned on by all of this, and so now that we've kind of generated this sensual, juicy idea of what turns us on, what we're going to do is we're going to split you all into groups, and we're going to basically try and actually develop something that will inhabit a future world from this space of love and articulation, and not the space of the issue, right? So, for example, in previous versions of this workshop, people have developed pieces of erotica from the future, or a love letter from the future, or sex education that can be written through poetry from the future, or a series of illustrations on body positivity that will help bodies be shaped in the future. So really, there's no end to what we can create together, except the time that we have, which is half an hour. So we're going to just split into different groups. We've already made these groups. And Gayatri, who's here, she's just going to tell us how we get into our groups. And then we will come back together and we're going to share what we've created together. And we have time, as we know. And if exciting ideas come out, we may even do an extension of this workshop where perhaps we really incubate that book of erotica or that porno that we want to make. But for this time, we probably have half an hour to come up with our ideas, and then we'll spend 15 minutes just sharing with each other. All right, I think we have gathered together the forces, or at least some people from each group. So maybe we'll just start by sharing what we, I know it's impossible to make something, so I apologize for this crazy constraint, but I hope everyone's come to a place. And also, I think what we'd like to do is extend this to be, perhaps have a second session in this, if there are ideas that we really feel like, actually, you know what, let's manifest this, it needs to exist in the future, then let's go ahead and do it. So we'll schedule a second session where we can take some of these ideas further. But to begin with, maybe Kaz, do you want to go first and share your ideas with us? Maybe you can choose someone from your group, or you can do it yourself.
I don't want to hog the microphone. Does anyone in the group want to speak? I don't want to take it away from anyone.
No, I think Kaz, you go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, thank you. So we started off by saying that we wanted to create a future that was that allowed us to learn and explore sexuality in different ways, and from the get-go, a space that was shame-free, a space that was endless, is what we ended up saying. And we decided that we were going to create like a curriculum that was visual. So in our visual curriculum, we created a film that incorporated all of the different senses. And we started off by setting a theme, starting off with like the time of the year, and we sort of passed the baton around so that people could add things. And so we created a scene that was set in spring, where the flowers were blooming and things were the newness of self, the newness of the earth. And we went on to add, the different senses that we were exploring. So, for example, touch, and we incorporated fruit into this film, and the texture of fruit from the rough outside, possibly, to the softness of the inside, and went on to add sound, and created the sound of like the rustling of leaves, which turned into like the rustling of body hair, against touch, and the sound of birds chirping, and the sound and different sounds. I hope I'm not missing any of it. Body slapping against each other, like the sound of like BDSM slapping on somebody's butt. Hand slapping. And then we also tried to figure out how we were going to incorporate the sense of smell, and to watch something burning, to see smoke, and then you can envision what smell, you can envision the smell. And then what else did we say? Sound. We talked about sound.
We talked about the taste.
We talked about taste, and we said umami.
Yes.
I think
Umami
was the first thing that came. Yeah, and also fruitiness. And then towards the end of this contribution, cauldron, I like it. I asked, how does it end? And everybody said it doesn't. And
it doesn't.
It's just it's a loop that that continues over and over, but every time that it starts over, it's something new. And then the best part about it is, because we're creating a future, and our imagination is really it's endless and it's vast. Everybody who has the opportunity to watch this film, the film that I watch and the film that you watch is completely different, because it's showing me all of the things that I said that I wanted to create in my future, and all of the things that I wanted to feel. So the film for me is going to be different than the film for you, because it taps into your senses.
Yeah.
Lisa, maybe do you want to share what we came up with in our group?
Yeah, sure. I think we kind of, after deliberating around a couple of potential ideas around pleasure more generally with regard to touch as a sensation on the skin, which is then, indiscriminate of gender, race, sexuality, etc., because everybody has skin. Another idea we were also thinking of was exploring the clitoris as this very under discussed and hidden, and yet super tactile and pleasurable part of human anatomy, more specifically female anatomy, and something that most people don't know enough about, because they never see the clitoris anatomically represented in textbooks or anything. So we were wondering how we could look at either of these aspects in an art project, whether it could be in a public space.
Kaz is showing us.
But we then decided that perhaps something that would be very accessible and easy to execute and easy to disseminate would be WhatsApp voice notes, which are touch-related stories. So one needn't have to know the identity of the speaker, and yet they could be stories that encapsulate all kinds of touch. It could be a parent's touch, it could be a lover's touch, it could be, your own touching yourself and a story to do with that, whatever it is. And people could just then, there could be a central number that's sharing these messages to those who want the messages. And you have this story that evokes the pleasure of that touch simply by hearing someone narrate the experience of touch.
100%. I think that was pretty much it. And some of the dimensions that came up as we spoke about touch were, good touch, bad touch. Also,
yes.
In the beginning, we started to think about an app that could teach people how to touch, and then we realized that perhaps, especially since a lot of us were from the Indian context, it needs to be something that also looks at being a little bit more accessible. We started to talk a little bit about untouchability as being an angle in our relationship with touch. Who gets to touch who? And so the WhatsApp voice note thing felt like it could be accessible. It could also be in different languages. So if I want to listen to stories in Urdu, I can just listen to stories in Urdu. And it's anonymous, and also it has this way of evoking almost like an oral tradition, where you're being recited a story. And like we said, it could be anything from a father's touch to the touch of a lover, to you touching yourself, and your stories about you touching yourself. That's it on us.
Run through, but we came up with something very concrete, which is very exciting. So we started talking about bodies and how we wanted bodies to be perceived and protected and valued after this pandemic lifts, hopefully. And we decided to come up with a zine that describes different rituals around tending the body, but not rituals in a prescriptive sense. Like we were saying, one of the problems is like, I don't know, look up 1,000 rituals for tending your body written by white ladies sitting in America. But we wanted these to be rooted in personal experience. So Shippa was saying, starting with writing love letters to our own bodies. And because so much of the shame and guilt that is imposed on us becomes internalized. So starting from that place of writing a love letter to our arms or to our hair or to our full selves, and then turning that into a tending ritual, and then putting it in the format of this zine, which Sonaksha came up with a stunning title to, called A Bridge Between the Now and the Next. And then making it online, open source, digital, printable. And then towards the end of our session, we kind of got to this place of then making it an interactive thing. And Neha brought up this postcard project, where basically people mail secrets to each other around the world anonymously in postcards. And I think, Sonaksha, you were saying they made a book out of this, no? So this book is basically a publication of all those secrets that have gone around the world anonymously, creating this chain of secrets, which really is an act of creating intimacy between absolute strangers and simultaneously releasing shame, and like Kaz was saying, by speaking these things, by speaking tenderness to our own bodies, we release a lot of the taboo and stigma around being tender with ourselves, and loving all our bodies in all their forms, all their stages, all their shapes, like tending a garden and nourishing it in the very same way. And then hopefully allowing that to create a domino effect by making it an interactive kind of piece. So that's it. Did I miss anything? Anyone?
You got it all, Joe.
You got it all. And we're gonna make it because it's really easy.
Vibes, guys. I mean, this is all stuff that needs to exist in the world. And I love that also we've come up with very different outputs, like with one we're working with voices and language and tongues. With the second one, we're working with a movie called Endless that just goes on and on and on. And finally, then there's also a zine, which is intimate and secret and full of love letters that you write for yourself. So I think this is really, really, really beautiful. I'm going to start
Sorry, I just wanted to add one last thing to that. Just to bring up the notion that we were discussing in our group about normalizing some of the fear that comes from experiences which are uncertain, or that come from sexuality or shame or grief or whatever that is, and kind of resisting the idea that we have to become the opposite of fear, because sometimes that, I mean, at least I brought that up and then my group validated me in that context, and I bring it up because I think about sometimes we become reactionary about what's not working, right? And we go the opposite direction completely, and then we want to suppress or avoid the thing that is real, which is fear, and pleasure is also real, but fear is also real, and fear is like needed. And so I think we brought up this idea of boundary, because if we didn't have fear, we would not understand what a boundary is. And so like sort of normalizing that idea of like being okay with fear, being prepared for fear, and hence talking about the pandemic too, right?
Absolutely. And that's also something, I mean, there's always this fear, there's danger, and then there's our imagination, right? And love. Yeah, and love. And I think it's a spectrum that, at least in my own journey, but also as Fearless, it's a spectrum that we're constantly exploring. When do we listen to the fears? Because sometimes fears are here to protect us. When do we recognize something as danger and not just imaginary? And when do we let all of that dissolve into an endless love? So thank you all for joining us on this call today. I know we're running half an hour late, and we have about 5 more minutes before we're officially half an hour late. But I would love to extend the invitation to all of you to continue this conversation, because even though you may not know each other, I actually know all of the people who are in this call, and you're all freaking rock stars. Like, right amongst us, we have some of the most incredible voices, from incredible illustrators, sculptors, activists, writers, influencers. We haven't we really curated who we wanted to be a part of this call. So I think we will extend that. We do a second session for those who are interested, and we try and see what happens when we try and work across borders in digital spaces together, and can we actually manifest something from this.
Thank you for listening in. For updates and announcements, please do find us on Instagram at Fearless Collective. And for more information on our current campaign Antidote and the rest of our work, please visit our website www.fearlesscollective.org.